All right, industrial society. We're coming into the industrial age, and so we're going to think about this, like technology, like the other ages. So remember, we talked about the Paleolithic and Neolithic, and touched on the Bronze Ages, right? Well, so now we mean machines, and not the kind of metal necessarily that's involved. But this changed everything. Well, are we still in industrial age? Pretty much, I guess. So then now they say we've transitioned to the information revolution, where that's the key to everything. Massive internal and external migration. Well, it changed. People moved to cities. Bunch of people moved to cities. It's the long story short. Steam powered locomotives, especially for this area of the world. I mean, Dallas wasn't much before before rail hit Dallas, and it was a convenient place for people to take cattle instead of doing them on long cattle drives like you see in the movies to Kansas City. Well, why do that? And when you can just have a hub in somewhere in Texas, like this place that they were trying to get going off of the Trinity River used to flow through there, right where the north of where the Union Station is now. If you ever catch the Dart, and at the time, all of that was a thriving rail center. So you bring your cows or whatever you needed to send to Kansas City, you start changing that. Well, then Dallas takes off, right? But there is a very storied and wild history of Dallas before all that. So in the sort of the true West, I guess, wild west of Texas, anyway. Population starts taking off, and then you have, as this happens, the rise in diseases a lot of times, right? So here they're going to talk about smallpox. So this is another one of the big ones I don't think I mentioned before. So remember malaria, cholera, just infected water, killing people, smallpox, typhoid. There's a few others diseases, a huge problem. And back when they're going to talk about how we got to vaccinations for cowpox to smallpox, it would help you with, because they're going to find out that it helps your cells figure out what to target. Birth control comes into mix. So we're not yet to we're almost to blood tests, but when we start getting into this modern age, so now you can start taking more control of your life. We'll note at the time the book's not, we're not covering Victorian England, but you all know the Victorian furniture and the Victorian style of dress. Well, syphilis was rampant in that time period because that was the presentation of that society. So they like to talk about how prim and proper everything was in England at the time when Queen Victoria was on the throne, but they did not like to talk about how even their husbands basically would go to brothels oftentimes during the week and bring all that stuff home, and it was just bad. Urban environment, sewage. And so I mentioned this before, but I cannot stress enough. You can't get your stuff together as a society until you figure out where your stuff is going, because there are just too many diseases, problems with water, all of that. Even in ancient Egypt, they had to try to control who was upstreaming each other of the Nile River, because people will tend to do their business in the river. New middle class started. It's still kind of a stretch for what we would call a middle class, what we're used to today. Working class anyway, and really we mean mostly men. So women still enjoy few legal rights, and the work is not necessarily valued, right? And when it comes to the familial, the family division of labor. And really, when we say middle class, like we think of the middle class, it's the highly skilled workers that are probably have spent a great deal of time in trade unions. Before we had child labor laws, this was the thing, especially because in the industrial era, sometimes some kids, small hands can really work on things and get into places that large hands cannot, and that was valuable. This is it's kind of funny for our purposes, I guess. Utopian socialists. In part, if somebody wants to do a presentation on this, this would be wonderful. But you could look up the Reunion community that came from France. All right, so we now have the Reunion Center in Dallas, but people have no connection to the original community there. And I'll just tell you, there was the stories are pretty wild that are associated with that. I'm not sure if you can find anything on that or not in our databases, but you probably could if in old editions of the Dallas Museum or the not Dallas Museum of Art. Before the Dallas Morning News was called that, it was called something else way back when, and you might be able to find some archives. Communism with Marx and Engels. Communism was never really fully implemented. It was always, we've grown up in America saying, well, we hate the commies, but usually that's because the Soviet Union and China, like back when I was a kid, we had the Soviet Union and China as communist. China's still technically communist. I guess fully communist because they still have a Politburo. But so I'm thinking more the Soviet Union. And they never actually implemented all this to the degree that they claimed it, and it was fairly corrupt. But so anyway, Marx and Engels have the idea for this. It doesn't seem. I don't see how you get it going with modern conceptions of property anyway. So what they thought though was the struggle between social classes, abolish private property and destroy the capitalistic order. I'm just going to point out here that notice that in Paleolithic society, so before we ever started farming, right? Did you really have social classes? So does all of this really come from a specialization of skills from way back when? Trade unions I was talking about a little while ago. These are actually really, really old. And I didn't do enough justice to it when we were in the Middle Ages. But man, these things sort of propelled the Middle Ages. And these trade guilds was what they were called at the time. So these are not as powerful as the guilds in the Middle Ages. But if you can control, like how are you going to train electricians? I mean, there aren't schools for that at the time. You got to learn it from someone else who has to learn it from someone before. And so if you put those people together, they can control the labor, and so they can control contracts and the price for those services. So if they are skilled, they've got a whole lot of sway in what is and is not going to get built. Really important, those guilds. I probably should have mentioned more when we were talking about the cathedrals. Hugely important for those things. Cotton textiles. Everybody likes wearing cotton. Cotton is one of the things that survive with cotton. I will point it for America, especially for this section of Texas, if you haven't heard this before. When we displaced native grasses that had very rich and very deep root systems, with cotton in this area, cotton does not have the root systems like native grasses do. They're fairly shallow. And so when we got into the 100 or so years ago when the Dust Bowl, it was because when we stopped, it couldn't hold the moisture, right? So all that dirt that was here ended up getting blown to California. We used to have really rich soil above this level of clay that we're on right now. It causes so many foundation problems. All right, I think that'll do it for this section.